My name is Hanif Ahmed Elisa, and I'm going to help as a co-moderator for our program this evening. And before we start the program, I would kindly want to indulge us to talk about how we are here or why we are here this evening. So, as Africans, we have been here since 2015 in Vladivostok, where as students, we have been part of the Vladivostok community since 2015 till now. But it so seems to appear that our participation in programs and our energy has been a bit on the low. And it is time that we pick ourselves up and share with the community what Africa is about. And as it is, wherever you go, your culture definitely comes to bear and people want to know about you. And it was the opportunity for us as a group and as a people who are from another continent to share with Russians and the other international student community here to get to know about Africans, what our culture is, who we represent, and what we are. And this evening, this is what we are going to do. Before we start the discussion, there is going to be a presentation by Peter Mendy to give us a short or a snippet of Africa before colonialism, and probably some aspects about colonialism as well. And we will get to know about what actually Africa was that we have not heard of. And often that part of that discussion is being cut off, and we only get to hear about the colonialism issues. Then we will now delve into colonialism and look at what actually happened during the period. Without much ado, I would invite Peter to give us a brief.
Thank you, Hanif. I think this is okay, right? So, my name is Peter, as Hanif already mentioned. I am a master's student of international relations here in Fairfield. So, I would give you a very brief introduction, a very, very brief actually introduction about colonialism in Africa. Because the history of colonialism is actually very huge, very big. So we can't discuss everything about it in just like 1 hour, 30 minutes or only 30 minutes. So we can move to the slides now. Yeah, so from the title, we just wanted to be poetic, as you can see, like from the voices of our grandfathers. Some people are asking, what does that mean? We want to give a history of colonialism from the African perspective, from what Africans write, what Africans think about colonialism, the people that experience it, and also their descendants, also what they think about this particular event, very important event that has shaped the history of Africa. Next slide. So I would first of all introduce you to this quote, and then you can tell me whether it's familiar to you. It says, "My island was now peopled, and I thought myself very rich in subjects, and it was a merry reflection which I frequently made. How like a king I looked. First of all, the whole country was my own meager property, so that I had an undoubted right of dominion. Ideally, my people were perfectly subjected. I was absolute lord and lawgiver. They all owed their lives to me and were ready to lay down their lives if there had been occasion for it, for me." So can anyone guess where this is coming from? Okay, let me give you hints. It's from a British writer in the 18th century, early parts of the 18th century, a British writer. I would say it's been one of the best books of British literature. Yeah.
David Livingstone.
No? Again? Maybe we can try again. Alright, let's move to the next slide and you would see. Robinson Crusoe, Daniel Defoe. British writer. Yeah. So from that quote, this is just a personal actually take on my side when I read that book. It was very funny actually, because if colonialism had a theory, I would say it's one of the theories, because that quote actually implies colonialism. Someone going to his home country, to another country, and colonizes it, and the people that live there, and makes it his own. So now you have this at the back of your mind as we go through the following slides. Move on. So now when we talk about colonialism here, what I actually mean is European colonization of Africa, which actually began around the 1800s to the 1960s. But we know that colonialism had actually happened way before this period. It has happened among different peoples and different times. And even in Africa, different peoples colonized each other. And maybe you can have a definition of colonialism by, which might mean a direct and overall domination of a state by a foreign power. Nigeria was dominated by the British. Gambia was also dominated by the British. You have Mali dominated by the British, politically and economically also. And colonialism, according to most people, it's a direct form of imperialism. So you might say it's just a part of imperialism. And when you colonize people, you colonize their politics, you colonize their economics. But when you are an imperialist, you may not necessarily colonize the people, but actually you can do anything that you want. You can interfere in their politics, you can loot their property, and so on. So that is why this quotation says that all colonialism is imperialism, but not all imperialism is actually colonialism. Move to the next slide. I think even Kwame Nkrumah also said colonialism is the last stage of imperialism, which is a very important observation. So now let me give you what Africa was like, how Africa looks like before colonialism. Was it necessary that Africa was supposed to be colonized? Was it necessary that Africa is colonized? As you can see from the photos here, Africans used to live in different principalities, kingdoms, empires. An example is the Ghana Empire, Songhai Empire, Mali Empire, different areas, different regions of Africa. From the southern, the western, the eastern, the northern, Africans lived in different kingdoms, and sometimes also in loose communities who did not have any centralized governments. And that is why it is estimated that about, in Africa, there were about 10,000 different states and autonomous regions before colonialism. Next slide. So what were these people doing before colonialism? Some of the things they were doing was production of bronze. I'm sure you must have heard about the Benin bronze. You know, the bronze materials that were stolen from Nigeria, not only from Nigeria, from all over Africa actually, and transported to the British Museum, to Germany, and all that stuff. So they were creating a lot of materials, artworks, actually. And these works perhaps could have been developed further, if not for colonialism. And also there were other civilizations, as you can see, like the Sao civilization, which could be found, which was actually situated in present-day Chad and Cameroon, around Central West Africa, around that area. That's where the Sao civilization were located in. And we also have, of course, the last time we talked about it, which is the Kuba Kingdom, with very advanced institutions. They had a police force, a military force, they had a judiciary, and all this stuff. So they were actually living their lives, even though not the whole of Africa was united. They were like independent, different states. Next slides. So this slide would show how, again, in relation to the previous slide, how Africans were divided in terms of the work that they were doing, in terms of the activities that they carry out. So as you can see, in the western part, they were mostly farmers. And in the southern part, where the Khoi and the San people gather, they were mostly hunters and gatherers of nuts and fruits and the like. And the southern part, they were also pastoralists. So they actually, this was since, as you can see, 1800 BC, that is 1800 before Christ. But Africans lived that way till the advent of colonialism. They had different things that they were doing. Next slide. So here again, this is something, maybe it's a personal vendetta from me. If you can trace back if you can point out the instigator, I would say, or the impetus for colonialism to one man, I would point it out to this guy, Leopold II of Belgium. The second of Belgium. He owned the Congo, owned a territory which was called the Congo Free State. It was a personal territory. It doesn't even belong to Belgium, but it belonged to him, the king. He owned it, the plantations, and the people that were living there working for him. So, move to the next slide. So what he did was, because he was afraid that maybe the British, the French, who were more powerful, might attempt to take the Congo from him, so he instigated that, let us share Africa, so that at least it's going to be legalized, that the Congo is mine, so the British do not have a right to it. You, the British, can take other parts also of Africa. But at that time also, as we know, at that time, Bismarck, we know him, students of international relations should know Bismarck. At that time, because Europeans have been fighting amongst themselves, you know that, and the Prusso-French War, Franco-Prussian War ended in 1872, right? So now, in order to stop those wars, they had to come together. In order to, stop those wars, they had to come together to see how they can. Part of it is to divide Africa, move European problems from Europe to Africa. So now when we divide Africa, we will not fight amongst ourselves. So they called a conference in next slide. They called a conference in 1884-85, which was the beginning of the formal colonization of Africa. But again, it actually started early before 1884. This actually formalizes it and legalizes colonization among European powers. And as you can see, there was no African representative, of course. So there were representatives from, of course, Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, France, and so on. But there were no African representatives. Move on. Yeah. And this is just a caricature, actually, a meme, just depicting Leopold and other imperialists dividing Africa. Next slide. And this part of Africa, which was called the Congo Free State, is actually present-day Democratic Republic of Congo and Congo-Brazzaville. This was owned by Leopold II of Belgium. Move forward. Yeah. So what actually happened in the Congo? There was a lot of brutality. So people were forced to, Africans were forced to work in the rubber plantations. And if you cannot meet the quota, if you cannot meet the amount of rubber you were supposed to produce, your hands were cut off. This was the brutality that Leopold II inflicted on these people. And a lot of people died, of course, of starvation, of diseases, and some literally killed. So it's estimated that about 10 million people from 1885 to 1909, about 10 million Africans died in the Congos alone, which was actually a genocide. Maybe some of you might have watched the movie White King, Red Robber, Black Death. Of course, the White King is Leopold. Red rubber, of course, the rubber that is germinated there and it is produced there, and of course, black people dying in that region. Next slide. And so, while all of this was happening, there were also some resistance, because it's not just okay or fair to just come abroad from nowhere or from somewhere to just come and colonize people and then they just let you do that. There was, of course, some resistance from the local people. And an example of the resistance is from the Zulus in South Africa. They fought with the British. It was about 2 wars actually in 1979. The first, the Zulu people actually, we would say, won. But then the second time, the British successfully dominated the Zulu people in 1879. So the resistance movement, physical, violent resistance, started around started around the 1800s. Next slide. Another anti-colonial resistance is from the Ashanti people of Ghana. The Ashanti people of Ghana and also the Herero people of Namibia. In Ghana, the Ashanti people actually started their resistance way before. They started their resistance in 1824. So they had to fight like 5 wars with the British. The last war ended in 1906 in which the British, because they had superior technology and they had like better weapons and they were more coordinated, they were able to subdue Ashanti-land and they dominated the people there. The Hereros also in Namibia actually were fighting their wars with the Germans. So from 1904, 1907 they had to fight bitterly. And also a genocide was committed there. Until this day, there are reparations that have been asked by the Herero people, their descendants, to either apologize or compensate. Because it wasn't only a genocide, but actually people were not only killings, but people were also removed from their farmlands, from their communities, and sent elsewhere or forced to work as laborers. Next slide. And this slide actually shows now the composition or the distribution of Africa. So as you can see, by 1913, the whole of Africa was divided between the British, the French, the Germans, the Belgians, the Italians, and so forth, except Liberia and Ethiopia. Liberia here and Ethiopia here. These are the only 2 independent countries in Africa that were not subdued by the colonialists. Apart from them, by 1913, all other African countries were subdued. As you can see, the distribution, the blue is the French, and then you have the British that owned these parts also of Africa, and then the Belgians there. Next slide. So then came World War I. So now when you subdue a people, you can then force them to work for you, and they can die for you. Remember our quotation. Now, came World War I, and Africans also were forced to fight on the side of the Allies, on the side of their colonial masters. So as you can see in the photo here, these are Senegalese soldiers in Cameroon in 1916. Next slide. Next. And came World War II again. Africans were forced to fight on the side of the Allies, on the side of their colonial masters, the French and the British. As you can see in this photo also, soldiers living in Congo to go and fight in East Africa. So after World War II, then came this turning point. Africans began to realize that actually, if we can fight with these people, the French, the British, and we've been with them in the battlefield, they die like us. They have brave people amongst themselves, but they also have cowards amongst themselves. Then they are human beings like us. Because actually, even my grandfather used to tell me that white people, that is the Portuguese, the Europeans that they were dealing with, they're actually semi-gods. They are extraordinary human beings. They are more than humans. So this actually played in the minds of the African people that, wow, these people are higher than us because they have greater technology, so there's nothing we can do. But after World War II, they realized that, wow, these people are actually humans like us. So we can fight and die together. If they can die, then that means we also can be free. We can fight with them and then gain our independence. And then these people came back from war and started fighting violently again for their independence. But they were not only fighting violently, they were also using diplomacy. Way before even World War II, even the Ashanti Kingdom, for example, twice, before it was subdued, sent a delegation to the United Kingdom to negotiate with the British. But the British, the first delegation that went, the British did not even, they were there for 1 year. The colonial officer refused to see them, refused to talk to them. It was only the second time that they actually talked to them because of some land disputes they were having. Next slide. So the people that were leading some of the diplomatic movements, if I can call it that way, are presidents of Ghana on the left there, and President of Morocco at the time, King of Morocco, rather, Mohammed V, and then you have Sékou Touré of Guinea, and at the far end you have Modibo Keïta of Mali. These are just a few of them. And then you have Salvador Keïta of Gambia, you have Kenneth Kaunda also. A lot of Africans also started a lot of movements in African countries to gain independence. Now the difference between these movements and the movements that happened in the late 1980s by the African principalities was that in the late 1980s, the movement for independence among Africans was not coordinated because Africans were living independently of each other. And actually, they were fighting amongst themselves also. They were enemies to themselves. So it was easy to divide and conquer them because they were just fighting individually. Once in a while, you would see some African kingdoms, for example, coordinate. For example, Sekou Touré. Sekou Touré, his grandfather, Ahmed Touré, fighting the French, coordinated with Prempeh of the Ashanti Kingdom also. But a more coordinated effort came during this time, after 1945, when these leaders actually came together and started a pan-Africanist movement that the whole of Africa has to be free. It's not only about one country, but all countries have to be free. And Ghana, for example, was the first country to gain independence in 1957. But when they gained independence, they said everyone has to be free. It's not only us. All Africa has to be free. So they fought that, and then in the 1960s, next slide, in the 1960s, they finally gained independence. Most African countries at this time gained their independence. So, next slide, to maybe make a conclusion, this is just a very brief history again. Maybe colonialism shouldn't have happened. It did happen. There are some good sides. You know, you can throw away the baby with the bathwater. You know, there are some good sides, of course, you might say, but overall, it actually impoverished Africa. Until this day, there are legacies of colonialism. Maybe in the discussion we can go through that, but until this day, there are legacies of colonialism that are lingering in the African mind and that are lingering in how we are structured, both politically and socially also. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your presentation. At this point, we probably may take a few questions because I'm sure maybe you have some questions on your mind just before we start. Sure. All right. So we have decided to not really take the seal out of our wheel now, and rather constitute the panel and start some discussions. After which you probably would have some more questions and would round everything up with your questions. Then I'm sure by then you would have probably some of your questions even answered during the discussion. Without further ado, I would call our moderator for our today's discussion. I'm sorry if I get the name probably wrong, but I'll try my possible best. Lukin Leonidovich Artyom. Yes.
Almost right.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. He's going to be our moderator for today. Thank you. The panelist for our discussions today is going to be Peter Mendy, our very able gentleman who gave the presentation, and Mr. Deisman Sinyabu. So I will hand over the microphone to our moderator, and I think the discussions are going to start from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Peter Mendy because it was his idea to have this series of events devoted to Africa. Is it like second discussion?
First.
The first one? Yeah. Actually, the idea was to start in winter, but due to Peter's absence, it's the first one. So, yeah, I would like, again, thank you, Peter, because I think it's a very important thing to discuss African affairs, especially here on Ruski Island. Because we're very far from Africa, but everyone knows that Russia has been moving closer to Africa in very many ways, and the presence of African students here on Ruski Island in Vladivostok, not only at FEFU, I think very much confirms that Africa is important even for those of us who have never traveled to Africa as yet, but I hope we will sooner rather than later. So, without further ado, let me open our panel. And as far as it stands, Peter has already given us in his very succinct but very informative presentation some background. So, should we now pass the floor to you? Probably you have something to say, so please, the floor is yours, and after that I think we will take a round of questions and answers. And I do have some questions, but I promise I will not abuse my authority, my prerogatives as moderator, so the priority for the questions will be of course with the audience. Thank you very much. So the floor is yours.
All right, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity to sit between.
Could you introduce yourself first of all?
All right. My name is Desmond Elihu, but the government calls me Desmond Sinyango, so you can decide which one to go with. I'm a medical student. I'm studying medical biophysics in the School of Medicine, and I think just to add what Peter has already.
Where are you from?
Oh, I'm from Zambia.
Zambia.
Yeah. Most beautiful country in Southern Africa.
Which place in Zambia? Zambia is a big country.
Very big, not that big, but I'm actually come from Livingstone. It's the capital of Zambia's tourism. Yeah, the most beautiful part. So I come from the most beautiful country in Southern Africa and the most beautiful city in Zambia. So it's very, very interesting for me.
Sure,
yeah,
very interesting.
So just to add on what Peter had said, and for me, colonialism is a system that I think we don't pay a lot of attention to it because it was done to Africans, first of all. Mostly because Africa was one that was mostly affected by colonialism and its effects. I think when Peter told me about this topic the first time, we wanted to discuss about the effects of colonialism, which we are actually seeing up to today. So not only for countries like Zambia, not only for countries like Namibia, but even in West Africa, we're seeing the effects of colonialism, and these things continue to go. So we talked about, he talked about Ghana being the first country that actually spearheaded the independence from colonialism. And even if we could disagree on the methods that they used, especially for Kwame Nkrumah, first thing that I always say is that the people that fought for our independence, we call them revolutionists. They had the spirit of emancipation, so they fought for that independence and everything, and they got the independence. What happens after independence? Because after independence, there needs to be governance, and how do you build that governance? And I believe that the mistake was you cannot build people that are revolutionists do not have the capacity to build societies after that. And that was a mistake with Africa, because we see Kwame Nkrumah now wanting, bringing Ghana into one party state and going on like that. Like, you know, these guys ended up ruling countries for 27 years. Like in my country, we had Kenneth Kaunda. He was going up to like 27 years in power, things were going bad and things like that. So those are some of the effects of colonialism, and I don't know the questions that you have, but I hope this discussion is going to be interesting. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Desmond, is it correct?
Yeah.
Desmond?
Desmond.
Desmond, yeah, I'm sorry. Peter, did you have anything to add?
No, I would just give
we are okay. So let's start our questions part. So anyone, please raise your hand, and yeah, your questions if you have any.
You have?
Okay.
Just pass it, please.
Please first introduce yourself and then give your question to whichever speaker. Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Aka Elijah. I'm from Nigeria, a third-year medical student. I think my first question would go to, I'm thinking Peter or this one. Okay, I think let's go to Peter. So what do you think about a non-colonized Africa in general? Like, colonization never happened in Africa. What do you think would have been the state of Africa today? Would you have had a much more better Africa, or would have been worse than we are? I'd like to know your thoughts about that.
Well, it's a good question. You were trying to put me on the spot now. So, of course, it's been debated, like I said in the conclusion remarks, that is it necessary, or was it necessary that Africa is colonized? Now, you would hear sometimes historians, British sometimes, they would say colonialism was actually good because it actually brought civilization to Africa. Western civilization to Africa. It also brought education to Africa. It brought roads, railways, to Africa. I think all of that is true, just partly true. It actually did more damage to Africa. Let's take the railways, for example, because before colonialism, there were already routes that linked markets, African markets, local markets, right? This is how Africans were doing their own economics. But when colonialism came in Africa, particularly in Africa, the railways that were built only connected the hinterland, that is the interior, to the ports, so that the goods can easily be transported. The gold, the diamond, the timber, the cotton can be transported from the hinterland to the ports and then to Europe. So this was the purpose. Now, this actually damaged our own roots because Africans did not know that. That's not how they were trading. That's why until then, until that, way after that time even, internally, Africa could not develop because the crops that they grow, for example, cotton, other cash crops that they grow, were not actually our own intention to grow those crops. Groundnut, for example, cotton, for example, these were actually grown only for the Europeans, not for the Africans. You get it? So they put quotas on Africa. For example, Africa was divided. Now, Nigeria, for example, would have to grow, let's say, cotton. South Africa would produce. So we were divided among, between crops that Europeans want to grow. Gambia would grow cotton, Ghana, gold. But Ghanaians, before the arrival of the Europeans, were not only dealing in gold. So what ended up, they were dealing in other cash crops also, other subsistence farming like tomatoes and the like. So what ended up happening, the Africans abandoned their own traditional ways of growing crops just for the Europeans. Just for the Europeans, because you understand that time the Industrial Revolution was actually booming. So they needed these crops for their own industries. And then when they produce these crops, when they manufacture these crops in Europe, they would in turn come and sell it back to the Africans on high prices. You get it? That's affecting us till this day. That's affecting us till this day. In fact, at some point I saw a statistic that till this day, Africa gets only 15% of the produce of the agricultural products it produces, only 15%. The 85% stays in Europe. I can give another one. In Ivory Coast and Ghana together owns about, I think, 70 to 75% of the cocoa industry. You get it? But what happens is, and every year the cocoa industry produces $100 billion. But how much do these countries get? Only $4 billion. So that means $96 billion stays in Europe. And what ends up happening is that these farmers that produce these crops, they don't enjoy them. They don't enjoy the cotton. They don't enjoy the cocoa that they produce. You get it? Because what? It's expensive for them. So there are so many things that colonialism actually did right. For example, English. It gave us the English language, which we are using now. You get it? It's actually cool. But overall, it did more damage. The fact that today Africa is one of the poorest continents of the world. Africa gave us dictators. I don't want to speak too much about this, but maybe I will pass the mic. But just one more example, one last example is the political system that it gave us. When they came, they were not ruling us democratically because we were not having representations in parliament. We had to actually fight for that, but we were not having representations. The British would appoint chiefs, for example, in the Gambia. Chiefs, that is divide and rule. They would appoint chiefs in the Gambia to rule us. You get it? But in the parliament, you will not have Gambians participating in the parliament. You will pay tax, but you don't have any representation in parliament. And because it wasn't democratic, it was just a one-man rule, when we gained independence, we perpetuated that system. Like this one was talking about Nkrumah. You can't blame Nkrumah that much, because that's the system Nkrumah inherited. We were not voting for our leaders in Africa. So when Nkrumah came, in Kaunda came, Robert Mugabe came, they perpetuated that same system of dictatorship. One man rule, because before that, that's the way the British were ruling Africans. So it actually destroyed Africa. It did more harm than good.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, it was another another speech, but I think it was a very illuminating one. Okay, any more questions? Or Semyon, please.
Yes, I'm Semyon Chulsky, and thank you for this opportunity to ask questions, to participate with you, like speakers. And my question will be addressed to all of you, just to know your opinion. So after the Second World War, Africans started their fight for independence. And international community, on behalf of the just established United Nations, created a mechanism for providing the independence to African states, like the Trusteeship Council. And my question is why international community, white people realized to give independence, to give rights their post-colonial Africa. Is my question clear?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, who would like to respond first?
Maybe I can go first. So I believe the question is why was it only after the Second World War that they begin to realize that Africans should gain independence, right? Of course, so many things had happened after the Second World War. I think the first, like I mentioned earlier, was that they were weakened, and Africans themselves realized that we can also fight for independence because these people are just human beings like us. We have fought for us, and we realized that they are just human beings like us. They can die. Now, that's first. The second is that it was expensive again to maintain the colonies. You know, to maintain a colony, you need to finance it. You know, you need to run the administration. So the British at that time, as we know, Britain, France, were utterly destroyed, right, during the Second World War. Of course, as we know, they had to be bailed out by the Americans through the Marshall Plan, right? So as they go, but not only that, America itself, which emerged as one of the superpowers in the Soviet Union, were utterly against colonialism. So they had to put pressure also on the British and the French. Roosevelt, for example, being the only American president who visited the Gambia during the Second World War, when he was going to Casablanca, he passed through the Gambia, Banjul. So when he got there, he saw the misery that was happening in the Gambia, how people were living, the dirt, especially in the capital cities, the poor sewage and drainage systems. He said he had to talk to Churchill because he was supposed to meet Churchill in Casablanca. He said he had to talk to Churchill that these Africans, you have to take care of them. You can't leave them like this. So that pressure mounted, including in the Atlantic Charter that was signed in, I think, in 1941 or 1942, between Churchill and Roosevelt, USSR and the United Kingdom, the Atlantic Charter, which actually gave the right for self-determination. Self-determination was only extended to Africa because of Roosevelt's pressure, because of Roosevelt's insistence that it has to be extended to Africa. But Churchill actually was like, no, it only has to be like among them, the Europeans and then the leading powers. But Roosevelt denied it. The Soviet Union also being the, I hope this is correct, actually, I read this somewhere. There was the first state to draft a resolution for the total independence of Africa, the Soviet Union. And the Africans also in the diaspora again were very instrumental. They were very instrumental in fighting for the independence of Africa. But again, why did they realize it at that time? It's because of the conditions around that time. You can't support it at that time. And if America and the Soviet Union were against it, I think it was already very expensive. And the grassroots also within Africa, the resistance, the wars, the violent attacks made them to give up power.
Yeah, so just to add on to what he said, I think after the Second World War, the thing is with World Wars is that every time, like the First and Second World War, no one wins after World War. So all countries had a lot of damage within themselves, so they had to rebuild. Now, you don't rebuild your own country and think of other countries and regions that you also have to control in some part of the world. So the first thing that all these European countries had to do, we have to think about ourselves. We need to build our own economies. We need to sit down and build our own security system so that we recover from the Second World War. So that was one of the things that, like, okay, there's now, so when Africans that were studying abroad now realize that these countries are now concentrating on themselves, they are trying to rebuild, we can use this to our advantage and actually mobilize back home so that we create that resistance and then actually gain independence. And the other thing was, you know, the governors, for example, in Southern Africa, we used to have governors like in Southern Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia, you know, these Southern African countries. So these governors were practically just abandoned. So you find like the British government would just, you know, they have a governor somewhere, but they're not sending the support. So at the end of the day, the resistance back is becoming too much for the governor to actually handle. So they keep sending letters back to the Queen and saying, oh, what are we going to do? You know, Kenneth Kaunda and these guys are putting pressure. We don't only want to be in parliament, we want to actually be independent. So at the end of the day, even if all these governors now came up with an idea, okay, maybe we can sit down and come up with a plan on how we could maybe integrate leadership here and there. But that couldn't happen because the support from their countries was not coming in to like in the extent that would actually help them to actually keep the colonies. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, more questions there? Okay, please.
Thank you. My name is Kirill. Thank you for such an
What do you study?
I'm studying regional studies. First of all, thank you for such an event and the chance to discuss such crucial questions. I would like to ask you a question about education in Africa. How you were taught about this period, about colonization in Africa? Are there any aggressive sentiments to European countries in African system of education, and are there any claims to these countries nowadays? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kirill, for that question. It's a very good question. I think when it comes to education, the thing is, our educational system is more, for example, in Southern Africa, it's more British. It's a British type of education system, and the subjects that they teach you, the history that they teach you mostly is from the British perspective. That is the wrong thing. So I feel when it comes to history, each country has their own curriculum when it comes to the history of their own country. So it takes their own interest. If you like, maybe those that will be interested to actually learn the history of other countries, that's when they can actually understand the whole picture of the effect of colonialism and things like that. But and sentiments towards European countries, of course there will be sentiments, especially when you read the extent of the atrocities that were done in countries like Namibia, you know, South Africa, and things like that. There will be those sentiments up to now. I think even when you go back home, when I'm back home, like when people talk about those things, there are those sentiments towards those countries. But I feel like Africa is growing. Africa is realizing that the only way forward is to actually not forget our history, to learn from our history and actually forge ahead. And these are some of the things that I feel these are part of the conversation that should be had, so that the Europeans can also understand that moving forward does not mean we have to forget about the history, because the history is now engraved in the African story. So you cannot only just forget about it and like nothing happened. So of course they have to accept the sentiments, accept them, but then we just have to find a way to actually move on from that. Yeah.
Actually, I have a very brief follow-up question, Desmond, to you. So, do I understand you correctly that the education system in Zambia follows like British patterns and like British interpretation of events? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Because it feels really strange.
Yeah. So the thing is, Zambia was colonized by Britain. So after that, mostly the curriculum and everything that followed, because the other thing was, the people that fought for our independence, most of them studied in Britain. So they went to colleges in London, they did their masters or things like that in London. And those are the people that when Kenneth Kaunda got independence, those are the people that he put in his cabinet. So these are people that had law degrees from London. Of course, when they sit down to come and now discuss about the education system that they're going to have for Africa, the only perspective or the only thing that they have is what they learned from Britain. So they built that. But we have 2 curriculums now, if I'm not mistaken. We have the Cambridge curriculum, which is purely British. But we have also the O-level one, which is more Zambian, but now it's more, they're editing a lot of things in it now. It's more like they're trying to make it purely Zambian, the O-level one. But the other curriculum, so we have schools that take
O-level 1?
O-level, it's called O-level.
O-level, what's that?
Ordinary level.
No, ordinary level.
Ordinary
level.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. But we have schools that have that one. Those are government schools. The government schools have the ordinary level type of education. But we have like private schools, some still do Cambridge. The exams that they write are prepared in Britain and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it's again part of the copycat mentality that we have in Africa. You know, we just copy from the former colonial masters. That's the education system they left us with, the political system they left us with, the economic system they left us with. So we usually do not verify even to see whether this actually matches, whether this actually is in sync with African tradition, African culture, and African history also. That's just to kind of add a little bit to what Desmond was saying. Now, with regards to the question whether we are like taught, like in our curriculum, let's say, to have those negative sentiments, you know, about the colonial masters. In my own observation, I don't think that happens, not within the curriculum itself, not within the curriculum. What actually happens is that you are taught more about the West than about your own history. That's what I have a problem with. So for example, when I think about it, when I think about my own country, for example, I do not know who my hero can be. Who can I point out to in my country to say this is my hero? And I think that's actually very essential. I think that's very necessary. Because when you come to Russia, for example, you realize there are lots of Russian heroes, and young people can look up to them, can see that, wow, this was a great poet, or this was a great fighter, this was a great painter, maybe. But when I look at my own country, I don't know who to point to as my own hero, because you don't even know them. You don't know them because they weren't even included in the curriculum in the first place. Because the curriculum, again, what does it entail? What the colonizers want. So they have to teach you how to read and to write. That was the most important thing for the colonizers. How to read and to write, so that you can be used. That is why most of them, again, those people who came back were like, some of them, not those who came back, but those that were like in the colonies, Africans, were mostly used as what? Teachers. My father was one of them. Teachers, as clerks, to be doing the clerical job for the colonial masters. What they were taught was what? Technology. How do you build, let's say, a machine that can sew clothes? How do you build a tap? Or how do you build a well? Which is actually very important. But they were not actually taught these skills. The only skills they were taught is how to read, which was actually literary, but not technological. You only know how to read and to write, but you don't know how to build. But if you can build, at the end of the day, you only end up buying from others what they produce. Why? Because that's how it was intended to be, that we are only going to be buyers. That is why until this day, it's very difficult, it's very sad in Africa. Until this day, you look at Nigeria, for example, it has a lot of oil, but Nigeria cannot process its own oil. Still, till this day, I don't know how far Dangote has gone with his project to process its own oil in Nigeria, but Nigeria cannot. Nigeria started the steel farms in Ajaokuta, steel, to produce steel. I'm not sure till this day, since I don't know, 1970s, is it, or 1960s, I'm not sure till this day a single inch of steel has been produced from that factory. Why? Because the people, the indigenous people, were not taught. So what I'm trying to say here is that the education system is not organic. It's not linked to the African culture and society. And I believe education has to sprout from there, so that the people can accept it. That is why most of the time, Africans don't value it most of the time. The last time someone said, what was it again? You know the chop, na people they take chop. What that means in Pidgin is you don't eat books, basically. So there's no essence for education. Some people have that mentality. Why? Because no matter how educated you are, how do you use it in Africa? Except you're only going to be absorbed by the international community, the international organizations rather, or you go to Europe and stay there. So basically education should have been linked to our own way of life. Then it would have been much more accepted and teach us the right skills, the right technology to develop ourselves.
Okay, please.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you so much for the privilege again to ask a question. I have two questions. First for this man, and then the second question for the sort of panelists. So the first question for this man is, I'm looking back at colonialism, right, and the era all of that happened. There are some claims historically that there was some complacency from some of the African leaders. Like some of the African leaders handed over their societies or maybe got bribes and all of that, helped to kind of betray their people. So now looking at it from our perspective today, we try to link the problems of Africa to colonialism. Do you think, and of course, Peter Mendy rightly said, Ivory Coast and Ghana, they produce most of the cocoa we have in the world today, but just barely 4% gets back to those countries. Now, do you think this truly is a problem of colonialism, or is as a result of maybe the corruption of the people? So how do you link the two, like the effects of corruption in Africa and the corrupt practices of maybe some of the leaders we have? How do you balance of the two? So that's a question for this one. And then I'll use this opportunity to ask the last question as well. This one is for the both of you actually. So what do you think is the most reasonable, I wouldn't want to say the best way actually, what do you think is the most reasonable way to restitute, amend, or tend to the ills perpetrated during colonialism? So now, some countries, for example, I think somebody mentioned Namibia, they just want some of these countries to acknowledge and accept that there were some ills perpetrated against them. Do you think that is right enough, or that is enough to just amend to the ills perpetrated during colonialism, or something more should be done? I'm asking this question because, for example, some Africans were taken to some of the European countries to build and all of that. Obviously, you will not tell them to pull down all of those stuff they've built. So how do you now restitute for the forced labor, for example? So is it enough just to come out and accept that, okay, truly we committed ills against you, or do you think there's a much more better way to restitute and tend to the ills of colonialism? Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Elijah. You ask very long questions, but I think your first question, I think recently I was talking to Gika about something. I think I was showing him a movie about Shaka the Zulu, and in that movie, Shaka was having a conversation with a European colonizer that had come to South Africa, and he asked him, he said, what makes you think in the future, let's say you and I won't be there, but your children and my children are sitting in this land that you say that you want to come to, so that I give you settlements and the people are going to live on their own, my people will live on their own, they will live together, they will learn Zulu and they will live as one. What will happen in the future when your children now decide to rise up and say that since they were born in this land, they have rights to this land more than my children, you see? And that's a perfect, it's a perfect scenario of what actually happened when I think I'll talk about Southern Africa because I'm from Southern Africa. It's, you know, the thing is, when you go to South Africa, even post-colonial, right now South Africa is independent and things like that, yeah, but 80% of the land is still owned by the Boers. So what that does is that in Africa, if you do not own land, you do not own wealth, right? You have no way of, there's no way that you can move. So the only jobs, like Peter was saying, like the only jobs that South Africans can have is like you can be a manager at a supermarket, you can be a this, you can be, of course they have the political power now, but to what extent is that political power? Because economically, it's like you have political power, but economically you don't have the power. So that's the thing, I think, you coming to your second question, I've forgotten your second question.
What's the most reasonable way to restitute for the ills of colonialism?
Well, there are two sides to it. The first thing is that there is actually nothing that any country would actually pay to restitute that, to be honest, because the damage is too much. So even if we say that, okay, well, let's put it in monetary form, let's say we're going to give each country that was colonized, let's say 5 billion, 5 billion, 5 billion, that is not enough compared to the damage that was caused, right? So what I think the only reason, but maybe these countries that had colonized these countries, like their influence on this country should actually completely cease. That would be the reasonable restitution, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Desmond is, well, I mean, that camp also, who believe or think that you can't put a number to it. You can't put a number to it. What can be done first is an apology, which most of the victims and their descendants are asking for. First is an apology. Germany is trying that with the some of the people at the Nam, they call them, or Herero, and some other tribes there, whom they took their lands from. Over the years, they've been improving actually. Now, I think it was about 2 years ago that the German government decided that, okay, it's going to launch, I think it's a $1 million or $2 million, I can't remember the exact amount, but at least some projects over a period of time. At least to compensate for the loss. But again, first of all, they have to acknowledge. It's very important to acknowledge. Now, to your next question about whether we can blame, I believe it's basically whether we should blame the use of Africa solely on colonialism. Of course, we can't do that. We know that there are legacies, but we can't do that, because if we do that, we erase the human agency that we have to also drive our own cause. In Africans, also, I believe we have the right mind, we have the right mentality, most of us, or some of us at least, have the right education. We can use that, of course, we can utilize that to develop our own country, our own continent rather.
Thank you. Okay, please.
Okay.
Introduce yourself and then your question or comment.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. My name is Thierry Kunyora. I'm from Zimbabwe, in the southern part of Africa. Okay, so my question...
What do you study?
Okay, I'm studying drug medicine from the Faculty of Medicine. Okay, so my question is directed maybe to Mr. Desmond. Should we say the post effects or the immediate effects of colonization are the same effects that are still causing some of the side effects we are facing in Africa? Or should we say what happened soon after colonization, or soon after independence of the African people from the Europeans, are the same effects that are still happening in Africa? Should we say those are the roots? For example, let me put it this way. If we look at what is happening in Africa right now, in some of the countries, mostly in some southern African countries and some parts of Central Africa. We got some countries where they say we got white men from Europe especially. Those countries, usually they sort of have a discrimination kind of from those part of countries in Africa. And also we also have in Europe, they also have some countries where they, whenever they want to offer some opportunities to Africans, they kind of like select countries from which they can offer such opportunities to Africans, and those countries will be like having much higher favor, kind of like. So should we say, was it like part of the immediate effects of colonial independence? I hope my question is clear.
I think, just to follow up on your question, if I understand your question correctly, you're talking about the post-colonial effects, right? That means what happened after we got the independence.
Yes.
Because I think you are from Zimbabwe and I'm from Zambia. Some of the whites did not leave.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So we have quite a large number of white people living in our countries.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're saying that these countries, like maybe for example, I know that for Zimbabweans, if you want to go to the UK, mostly you don't even have to write the English test and things like that.
Yes.
Because you guys have Britain says that you guys speak very good English. We can debate about that. Yes. But you guys actually have a large number of actually post-colonial families that remained in Zimbabwe and stayed in Zimbabwe. So is that what your question is?
Yes, that is the question.
All right, that's a very good question, James. The thing is, I think every colonial country, every country that colonized another country, they had a plan post-colonial. I think Britain, for example, had this thing they call the Commonwealth, right? So all these countries that are part of the Commonwealth, it's like, I love the quote from one of my favorite mentors, Ravi Zacharias. He says, "Freedom that is given to you by your master will not guarantee you that he sees you as his equal." So the thing is, so post-colonialism, like, okay, we're going to have the Commonwealth, and then all these countries that are part of the Commonwealth, like, we will find a way to, of course, as long as you're part of the Commonwealth, the king right now is the head of the Commonwealth. So basically, all our presidents, all of them, they are under the King of England, or the King of England. So that's the thing, and you know, it's actually very sad because when we got independence, and then we decided that, okay, we don't want to send the Europeans back home. Let some of them stay back home, and then we can see how we can work together and build societies around them together and things like that. But that only worked for the whites and the Europeans, because telling them to remain was basically telling them that they're going to run most of the farms. Like in Zimbabwe, most of the farms before Robert Mugabe came and did that, they were actually owned by white people. Basically, they were running they were running the economy and things like that. So I think that the main thing was post-independence. We didn't really understand how we wanted to build our societies and build our countries. So I think it was part of the negotiations for getting independence. Okay, if you get independence, you have to allow these people to stay, integrate them and things like that. Then in the future, maybe we would cut some checks to you people, maybe help you and things like that. And those people that fought for independence thought that was a good idea and they went for it. But in my opinion, yeah, it's affecting us in a very, very bad way. And I don't know how we can actually move on from that.
I think post-independent Africa was actually catastrophic, like really for Africa. Lots of coup d'etats, especially in French Africa. If you're against the French, you are gone. Nigeria, I think it was in after gaining independence, is it in 1960, and then 1967, the Biafran War, to 1970. In most parts of Africa actually, coup d'etats. You know, why? Because they were not actually taught, these leaders were not actually taught the governance system that was imposed on them. Few people were educated to be able to run that system. So because when the British were living, they were living in a haste. They were living in a hurry because it was time. So who do you put in place to govern these people? Now those people that came back, of course they wanted independence, but to be frank, they were not prepared for it. Like mentally, if I could put it that way, or psychologically, equipped to be able to run a society, to be able to run a country like Nigeria. That was why after independence it was catastrophic, coup d'etats upon coup d'etats. The coup d'etats we are seeing today, I would say, especially in French Africa, not French Africa, but at least Francophone Africa, is as a result of that. Now, why? Because let me give an example of the French particularly and their system. Now, when the French governed African countries, they were using two policies: the policy of assimilation and the policy of association. So assimilation, in the sense that you are part of France, like you are French. In Senegal, for example, if you are born in Rufisque, Gorée, Dakar, the capital, St. Louis, you are automatically French. So they were actually making them French people. So the French, that's what they do. That's what their problem is. When they colonize you, they want to make you French. So, but that didn't work. So they come up with the policy of association, meaning that just like the Commonwealth, you are going to become a larger part of France-Afrique. I'm sure you must have heard about France-Afrique. You know, we are going to be in a form of an association. African countries and France, we are going to be together. But your governance is going to come from France. Now, the only country that objected to that was Guinea. Guinea-Conakry. They said, no, we are not going to do that, and they opted out. But what happened when they opted out? The French uprooted everything that they did, that they planted in Guinea. If they cannot uproot it, they will burn it down. That's what they did. Even the street lights had to be uprooted and taken to Ivory Coast. That's what the French did. Now the British on their part, they left, and left totally. The British did not have any linkages. France still have, I'm sure we know about these laws. When they were when African countries were gaining independence, these laws that they signed, these treaties they signed with France. For example, one of them is that in Ivory Coast, for example, not only in Ivory Coast, but in most French, African countries that speak French, colonized by France, if French interest is threatened in Ivory Coast, the French commander in Ivory Coast has the right to seize the telecommunication company in Ivory Coast and then declare whatever he wants. Meaning France has the right to intervene if French interest is threatened. Those laws are still existing till this day. And then you have to bank with France. 80% of your revenues has to be banked with France. And if you want to withdraw that, you cannot withdraw all of it. Do you know how much you have to withdraw? Only 20%. Your own money, if you want to get it back, you're not going to get it back. We can only give you 20%. And they were forced to use the CFA. We were forced to use the CFA franc. So African banks have to bank with the French government. That is why, over the years, it has been documented that about $400 billion of African money is in France. $400 billion. And now we talk about Africa being poor, that it's Africans. Of course, we can't blame colonialism. We also have our part, but colonialism has done like a lot of damage once again.
Thank you. Actually, I would like to ask for some clarification from you, Desmond. You mentioned, if I'm correct, you mentioned that in Zambia, in your country, a large amount of land is still owned by white farmers.
Yeah,
is that correct? Whereas in Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe confiscated the land from the white farmers. In Zambia, white farmers are still very much landowners, right? So
no. Actually, I was talking about South Africa. South Africa, the country.
Not Zambia.
Not Zambia. But Zambia has, let's say, 20% of farmers are white farmers. That their generation spans colonialism. Yeah. So they came during that period, and they are still like running the farming industry.
20%.
20% in Zambia. Because what happened was when Kenneth Kaunda came in, it's like he took the same route that Robert Mugabe took. So what they did was they grabbed the land, but then they used the constitution. It was like the government was going to own the land. And the only people that could own, let's say, larger amounts of land apart from the governments were the chiefs. Because we have like chiefs in Eastern Province, in the Northern Province, like those Tungas and things like that. Those are the only ones that could own vast majority of land apart from the government. So I feel like those laws, and I think it's the same thing like Robert Mugabe tried to do, but he just didn't do it in the right way. But like those are some of the laws that actually made it reduce the number to 20%. But it was more than that. Before independence, I think it was maybe 80 or 90% of that. Yeah.
So if correct me if I'm wrong. So as far as I understand, in Zimbabwe there are almost no white farmers left, while in Zambia there are still, like you said, 20%.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
In Zimbabwe now, because of the change of government, Robert Mugabe is not there. They have what's his name?
Right now?
Yeah.
There's Emerson Mnangagwa.
Emerson Mnangagwa. So Emerson Mnangagwa is not because of the sanctions that were put on Zimbabwe based on the route that Robert Mugabe had taken. They are trying to now, like, let's say maybe negotiate so that the West can take out those sanctions and Zimbabwe's economy can thrive. But still, for Zimbabwe, because of the way they chase the farmers, it's like it was not. They didn't do it through the constitution. They just went and grabbed land. It was like, okay, if you are a white farmer, it's like we get the land from Sheyi and we give it to Elijah because Elijah is Zimbabwe. Now, Elijah doesn't know how to run the farm, but you're giving him the farm because he's Zimbabwean. So that was the issue with Zimbabwe. But with Zambia, it was like, okay, the government had legally taken the land. So they was like, oh, okay, if you're a farmer, do you still want to do business in Zambia, or is it favorable for you to do business in Zambia? If not, you sell your farm and that's it. You go and do business somewhere else, or you continue and work around that. Yeah.
And I think this is why, maybe this is one of the reasons Zambia is much more successful economically than Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe is broke economically, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, any more questions? Yeah, please, the lady.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Tandiwe Nkoma. I'm studying psychology. I'm from Zambia as well. And I initially had one question, but Desmond said something. Now I have a question for him, and it will lead to my second question. So my first question is, you mentioned that in order for us, it was on Terrence's question, he said in order for us to stop feeling the aftermath of colonization, we have to, the Western influence has to stop. Now, my question for you is, who is it up to stop that influence? Is it up to us as Africans to put a stop to say, this has gone on for long enough, or do we now have to start looking to the Western side to say, please stop influencing us? And then if that's the case, aren't we still giving them the power to be able to influence us? Because if they say, we won't stop the influence, what are we as Africans going to do? And then that leads to my second question. That's for you and Peter. If you were given the opportunity to construct an educational system for Africa or for your country specifically, because you know your country well, in order to, as Peter said before, we have a system that is not necessarily helping the development of Africa because of what we are being taught in schools and whatnot. So if you had the chance to, if you're given the opportunity to create a curriculum for your country or for Africa that is going to benefit us and release us from the shackles of economic depression from the Western world, what would you implement so that, let's say, in the next 15 to 20 years, we now have a society in our countries and in Africa in general that is more liberated when it comes to understanding how our countries and Africa works economically, politically, and so on and so forth. Yeah, those are my questions.
I think I'll start with the second question on the education system. If I was to come up with a plan of how I think the Zambian education system should look like, I think the first thing is, education is changing, right? Education is always evolving. So there's a difference now. If I was to do that 50 years ago, it would have been different from the way I would do it now. Because now it's more technological, right? So I feel the educational system should now encompass around the technology part, because that's the future, you understand? And of course, like, I think you know how our curriculum is. We learn things that we actually don't need. We went going to school, we used to learn things like Zinjathropas and things like that, all the things like that. Things that, depending on the program that you want to do, some of the things are actually unnecessary. So I feel like I would make a program that would suit each student, the things that they want to do in future, you understand? Don't make them go through things that are practically just unnecessary, like things like that. But it should embody around the technology part and the science part, because I believe that is the future. For your first question, I think that one, there are two sides to it. Number one is, they say that if you want to control the rat, you have to continue giving it cheese, right? And I feel that's what keeps happening to African leaders, you understand? If you are in a position and the West think that the guy that is actually leading does not suit their interests, so they sponsor those opposition leaders and things like that. And of course, you're going to reach that position and become the president. What do you do? These people sponsored you for 8, 15 years while you're in opposition and things like that. And you find yourself in the position of the president. And of course, when they come to you and ask you for favors, what are you going to do as a human being? of course you're going to you'll be required to kind of do some papers, and that's the thing. So the influence for the influence to stop, one, we have to define democracy on our own. What do we call democracy? What is the definition of democracy? I feel that's the first thing for us to stop the influence. Because the other thing is, our political systems are the ones that are actually making it easy for us to be influenced, let's say, by the West, right? Because we have a system where, let's say, a president comes for Zambia, for example, is 10 years maximum. So you come for 5 years and then 10 years. So if a president comes for the first term, let's say 5 years, in the second year of his term, trust me, he's not thinking about what Zambia is going to be in the next 30, 50 years. That's not his plan. He's thinking about his next election, how he's going to win that. Now, if you have, let's say, a more superior country comes to him and says, oh, okay, we want this, we want this, we want that, and then we're going to give you 1 billion. He's looking at the 1 billion and, oh, with this 1 billion, it can fund my next campaign in the next 3 years. So, okay, I'll go for it, even if it doesn't suit his country's interest. So the thing is, our political system has to change first if the influence has to stop. It's not something that you can just wake up and say, like, oh, okay, our influence stop. Or maybe that can happen, but I feel the first thing is we have to define our own political systems, define our own democracy. How do we look at democracy, and what do we call democracy, and how do we want to govern ourselves? How accountable our leaders going to be, so that we can now, it is from that we can build institutions that can now be free from external influence.
I think I can make a proclamation here. Maybe my supervisor here would agree with that. With regards to your first question about influence, I think it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop because Africa matters. Like, Africa matters a lot to the global economy because Africa produces a lot. We have lots of minerals, we have lots of resources, and these things are actually needed in the global economy. So Africa actually matters. And there is that chain that has been built since colonialism, in the sense that there are companies. During colonialism, it was like the British Niger company, and then they would have a company in Ghana, company who would do these businesses, right? But they were doing this as private firms. If they don't do well, they are taken away. Like in Nigeria, for example, taken by the British government. If they see that these private companies are not running these industries very well, they are not effective in what they are doing in transporting the agricultural products, the raw materials from Africa to UK, or they are not able to control the locals, the British government takes charge of it. Now, those companies that we had during colonialism have been transformed now to these multinational corporations that we have in Africa. Now, you could have oil companies, for example. You can have them in Nigeria, you can have them in Ghana. These are like private firms, you get it. But actually, in a sense, they are registered. They are from France, for example. They are from the UK. You get it? So they are everything that they are trying to do, all the profit that they are trying to gain, at the end of the day, it's for France and it's for the United Kingdom. You get it? So all these laws that are now set up, even at the multinational level, multilateral level, let's say in the WTO, World Trade Organization, are set up not by Africans. You get it? Not with Africa in having a representation there about how our resources should be governed, about how these how we should trade amongst ourselves, but are set up between these multinational corporations and, of course, the more developed countries. Now, when they come to Nigeria and come to Ghana, your hands are tied because, one, like this one was saying, you don't have the technology, one, to be able to manufacture. So you can only rely on them to manufacture. The only thing you can do is to produce raw materials, primary goods, but you cannot manufacture, so you have to rely on them. So what ends up happening is that they put the price, they state the price, what should be on the market. They tell you how much you should sell your products for. You get it? So again, the little that I know about international relations is that, when societies like Africa, continents like Africa, because of where they are positioned, because of the produce that they have, because of the products that they can create. Now it creates a lot of, just like in colonialism, a lot of competition from outside. And that's not going to stop. Do not expect that to stop. Now, you can only minimize the influence that particular countries may have, let's say on the Gambia and Ghana. You can only minimize it, but you cannot put it away altogether, because again, your money is coming from them. The African Union itself, a larger chunk of its budget comes from European donors. So how can you be, because what we are talking about here is, can we be totally sovereign? Can we be totally independent? Let's forget about that. That's not going to happen. We cannot be. We can only minimize it, but we cannot be. And with regards to your second question, what kind of education system I would draft for Africa? Again, it has to be linked with our way of life. It has to be what we want to do. Again, it has to be what we want to do. When you look at our local markets, for example, people can sew like traditional attires, for example. Not like these ones Elijah Shea is wearing. These are European. They've only been Europeanized. But we can show those ones, traditional attires. You get it? There are other things that we need. For example, how do you produce wine? How do you produce I don't want to use this alcohol, but actually the first time I saw how alcohol was being produced in the Gambia, I was just 14, I think. And that actually tripped me. Because we were doing science as a subject, right? Now I've seen around in my community how people are producing alcohol. Now the way they produce it is that they'll get 3 barrels. The first barrel would have the mixture of the product. It could be cashew, it could be sugar, the mixture of the product, of what you want to produce. Now the barrel in the middle, it only has water, just water. And then the third barrel, that's where the finished product is going to go to, because all these 3 barrels are connected with a pipe. You get it? So the produce heats up here from the first barrel, so that vapor gets cooled down and it turns into water in the middle barrel and then goes to the next. I know I'm not a medical student here, but then goes to the last barrel. So this was actually remarkable for me, because I was like, who taught these people how to do this? That's the process of distillation, if you can remember.
Yeah.
Who taught them how to do this? They never learned that at school. Who taught them how to do this? Because when I think about it now, I'm like, we can produce our wine this way, maybe. But people are not taught that. But when I went to class, and we had a science class, so I went to the lab, and then I was taught distillation. I was like, wait a minute, this is what my guys do back home. This is what my guys do, but they've never been to school. So can we have that type of education system wherein it's going to take account of the indigenous market, the indigenous system, and then bring it up to our curriculum, particularly in the STEM fields now, the use of vocational training institutes, for example. I believe this is what builds society. But in the Gambia, we have another discriminatory attitude. People who go to vocational, not in the Gambia, I believe in Africa, everywhere. People who go to vocational institutes are termed as they don't know anything. They fail, they are dropouts and things like that. We who go to university are like, yeah, the educated ones. But we educate and then we cannot create anything. And then we are not free at the end of the day when we become politicians. We have other people running us. Let's start from the grassroots, from our own way of life.
That's a great one.
Guys, I'm saddened to announce that our time is almost up. So it was our first meeting, but definitely we'll have more. And I think Peter will make a respective announcement. And I just want to make my own announcement. Actually, I would like to invite all of you to another event which will be on the subject of Africa, which will happen in just 1 month on April the 25th. Our School of Regional International Studies, Oriental Institute, it's another name. We are going to hold a panel on Africa, which is organized by Peter and Semyon Chulsky, and I will be again the moderator. It will be in English and Russian, so you're all invited to participate as presenters or discussants. The information about this conference is available on the website of our School of Regional International Studies. Please visit our website or refer to Peter or Semyon. And again, let me thank our brilliant speakers. Actually, I have learned enormously, frankly, from our discussion today, and I look very much forward to the next Bantaba meetings. And over to you, Peter.
So I would say, I will also say thank you very much for at least making up some time with your busy schedule to join us and then to moderate this discussion. So like you said, we will have a lot of events coming up, 3 more events coming up, and also the one we are organizing with Simeon. So we will of course invite everybody to be part of it. So thank you all for coming, and of course Anif, maybe make a closing.
Thank you very much. I think that like Artyom mentioned, I think that's
Professor Lukin.
Professor Lukin, I think that's better. Yeah. I relate to that better. Yeah. Okay, so this has been quite engaging, and I believe you've learned quite a lot, as I equally have. It's been quite, thought-provoking as well, and I've really loved the discussion. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for this discussion. The next discussion is going to be on the 19th of April, and it's going to be here at the same venue. Just before we have the conference with the International and Regional Studies Department, and I'm going to be there for that program. Yeah, I'm going to be there. So,
and what will be the topic of the next Bantaba?
I think that
is the current world order suitable for Africa?
Yes. So we're going to talk about the bipolar world and that sort of discussion. So I think that yes. Is the current world order suitable for the development of Africa? Yeah. So I think that you will have to equally be here and be part of this particular discussion. And I would equally want to thank our online participants for being there, and we acknowledge your participation in this particular program. Hopefully in the next discussions, we will see how we can integrate having you to send in your questions and we can respond to that as well. I think that's going to be great. And this program is being brought to you by the African Society in Vladivostok. And we thank you all for making the time to join us this evening for the discussion. Thank you very much, and see you on the 19th.